Hello, my brothers and sisters, and welcome to another episode of Off the Beaten Path, the show that looks at paranormal events both historically as well as in modern-day times. As always, I'm your host, Rev.Hagen, and as always, I'd like to welcome our listeners at SCRMradio.com. That's Scream. Radio.com for all your horror and paranormal needs. Now, speaking of Scream, those of you on YouTube may notice I'm wearing my Scream t-shirt. That's right, my fellow Screamers. You can own one of these fabulous t-shirts. I'm going to leave a link in the description below. I know you're going to want one. They've got hoodies, t-shirts, bags, and more merch to come for sure. You don't have to get it in black like I do. I'm just metal like that. But you can get it in white. You can get it in yellow, blue, orange. The list goes on and on. The colors of the rainbow, my friend. I just, like I said, prefer black. So be sure to go out there and order your Scream Radio.com t-shirts while supplies last. So let's kick things off with a segment we call Strange and Unusual Facts.
Strange and Unusual Facts.
Now, today's Strange and Unusual Fact is about Mana K. Mana. Now, in the 17th century, there were a king and queen in Nepal. Now, the queen was rumored to be divine, to be a goddess. The king did not believe this, but one day he actually saw the queen in her divine form as the goddess, and her devotee was in the form of a wolf. He couldn't believe it. So he actually confronted her the next day and said, hey, I don't know if he said this, but he probably said something to the extent of, hey, I saw you in your goddess form. I can't believe the rumors are true. 2 days later, this ruler was dead. The king was dead. Now, you may think the queen had a hand in that until you understand that the tradition of the time was for the queen to die in the funeral pyre of her husband so they could restart a bloodline. So before she went into the pyre, she turned to her devotee and said, look for the signs, I'm going to be coming back. And then she went into the fire. Now, about 2 weeks later, a farmer was plowing his field, and his plow, and remember these are push plow with oxen and that kind of thing, broke a rather large rock in half. And what happened is, on one side of the rock, blood started pouring out, and on the other side of the rock, milk started pouring out. And the farmer couldn't stop it. Well, news of this event spread and reached the ears of the devotee, who saw this as a sign that his goddess had returned. So he went to the farmer's field, built a small hut around it, and did some tantric exercises, if you will. Hello, thank you very much. And stopped the milk and the blood from pouring out of these stones. What happened is they built a temple on this site, the temple of Mana K. Mana, that still stands to this day. And to me, the really strange and unusual fact about this story is everybody that has run this temple, right, is a direct descendant of Mana K. Mana's devotee. And that's the story of Mana K. Mana and today's Strange and Unusual Facts.
Strange and Unusual Facts.
So, our main story today on Off the Beaten Path is about UFOs during the 1500s. Now, imagine, if you will, it's spring in the 1500s. It's April 14th, 1561, and you're going about your normal day. You go outside, you've probably had coffee. I don't know if they had coffee in Nuremberg, Germany in 1561. They should have. I don't know how they survived without it, if I'm being honest. But maybe they had some tea or a beer or some meat or something. And then you're out starting your day, and you look up and you see these strange craft or shapes in the sky. Multiple strange craft and shapes in the sky that look like they're actually fighting each other. They're shooting things at one another, for goodness sakes. How weird would that be? But that was the case on April 14th, 1561. They described an aerial battle, followed by the appearance of a large black triangular object, and then a large crash outside the city. According to witnesses, there were hundreds of spheres, cylinders, and other shaped objects moving erratically overhead. Now, this could just be a story, kind of a tale out of hand, a tale of verbal communication, kind of verbally handed down from 1561, if it not for the broadsheet of the time. Now, what they would do with broadsheets is they would put a lot of things on a single sheet of paper, but way back then, right? The one that particularly describes this one had some carved printings. They would carve something and they would print it out on these broadsheets, right? A picture of the big event that they're talking about. But they'd have weather conditions and that kind of thing in these things as well. The broadsheet sheet describes objects of various shapes, including crosses, globes, 2 lunar crescents, a black spear, and tubular objects from which several smaller round objects emerged and darted around the sky. Now, these guys have no frame of reference for these objects in the sky, right? You and I, in modern day society, we're used to seeing planes go overhead, right? We're used to at night even seeing satellites go by. We're used to a lot of activity and noise, right, coming from the air. Back in 1561, they didn't even have blimps, for goodness sakes. They were not used to looking up during their daily routine, right? They're just kind of, why look up? There's nothing up there but blue sky and clouds. Although, clouds are pretty cool. So what I'm going to do now is actually read that broadsheet. I still can't talk. Let me get a little libation here. Yes, I still get a little gassy all the time. Yeah. I'm going to read the broadsheet, basically the newspaper of that day. The entire article for you. Don't panic, it's not too long. But here we go. This is translated. If you're watching this on YouTube, actual pictures of the broadsheet and the carving printout will be appearing on the screen periodically. Jeez, I really can't talk today. Throughout this off the beaten path. So here we go. In the morning of April 14th, 1561, at daybreak between 4 and 5 a.m., a dreadful apparition occurred on the sun, and then there was seen in the city of Nuremberg, before the gates and in the country, by many men and women. At first they appeared in the middle of the sun, 2 blood-red semicircle arcs, just like the moon in its last quarter, and in the sun above and below, on both sides, the color was blood red. There stood a round ball of partly dull, partly black, various color. Likewise, there stood on both sides, and as a torus about the sun, such blood red ones, and other balls in large number, about 3 in a line and 4 in a square, also some alone by themselves. In between these globes there were visible a few blood-red crosses, between which there were blood-red strips, becoming thicker to the near and in the front, malleable like rods or reed grass, which were intermingled among them 2 big rods, one on the right, one on the left, and within the small and big rods there were 3, also 4 and more globes. These all started to fight amongst themselves, so that the globes, which were first in the sun, flew out to the ones standing on both sides. Thereafter, the globes standing outside the sun in the small and dark rods flew into the sun. Besides the globes flew back and forth among themselves and fought vehemently with each other for over an hour. And when the conflict in and again out of the sun was most intense, they became fatigued to such an extent that they all, as said above, fell from the sun upon the earth as if they all burned. And they then wasted away to the earth with immense smoke. After all this, there was something like a black spear, very long and thick-sided. The shaft pointed to the east and pointed to the west. Whatever such signs mean, God alone knows. Although we have seen shortly, one after another, many kinds of signs on the heaven, which are sent to us by the Almighty God, to bring us repentance. We are still, unfortunately, so ungrateful that we despise such high signs and miracles of God, or we speak of them with ridicule and discard them to the wind, in order that God may send us a frightening punishment on account of our ungratefulness. After all, the God-fearing will by no means discard these signs, but will take them to heart as a warning to their merciful Father in heaven, will mend their lives and faithfully beg God that he may avert his wrath, including the well-deserved punishment on us, so that we temporarily here and perpetually there live as his children. For it may be God grant us his help. Amen. By Hans Glaser, letter painter of Nuremberg. Got pretty religious there, right? But that was the gig at the time. If there was something miraculous happening, it was a sign of God. Today we would look at that and say, wow, UFOs are here in force. I think this is some kind of invasion. Oh my God, what do we do? Interesting that the physical evidence of these ships fell to Earth and completely burned away. Or did it? There's no proof to prove otherwise. But that is really, really wild. Really wild. And I'm wondering what the other signs in the heavens that they're talking about in this article. We know one more, because in France, something very similar happened. In 1566, a celestial phenomenon over Basel, France, a series of events on the 27th through the 28th, and on the 7th of August, 1566, reported in another one of these sheets, as occurred in Basel, were red and black spheres that had led an apparent sky battle. So 5 years later in France, first there's the one in Germany, and then 5 years later in France, this all happens again. A series of mass sightings, and not just above Basel, Switzerland. I am terribly sorry. The Basel pamphlet in 1566 describes unusual sunrises and sunsets. Celestial phenomena were said to have fought together in the form of numerous red and black balls in the sky and the rising sun. The report discussed among historians and meteorologists. The phenomenon has been interpreted by some ufologists to be a sky battle between unidentified flying objects. I'm trying to find the print. Here we go. Now here is the text on the broadsheet that happened for the 1566. It happened in 1566 three times, on the 27th and 28th of April, and on August 7th. Against the sunrise and sunset, we saw strange shapes in the sky above Basel. During the year 1566, on the 27th of July, after the sun had shone warm over the clear, bright skies, and then around 9 p.m., it suddenly took a different shape and color. First, the sun lost its radiance and luster, and it was no bigger than the full moon. And finally, it seemed to weep tears of blood, and the air behind him went dark, and he was seen by all the people of the city and countryside. In much the same way, also the moon, which had already been almost full and has shone through the night, assuming an almost blood-red color in the sky. The next day, Sunday, the sun rose about 6 o'clock and slept with the same appearance it had when it was lying before. Don't you love the way they talked back then? He lit the houses, streets, and around as if everything was blood-red and fiery. At the dawn of August 7th, we saw large black spheres coming and going with great speed and precipitation before the sun, and clattered as if they led a fight. Many of them were fiery red and soon crumbled and then extinguished. So we've got these two series of events, one in 1561 in April, and then again in the summer, or 1561 in April, like I said, and then the summer of 1566 in Switzerland. Both describe aerial battles, and what's really interesting to me is like in the first story, right, above Nuremberg, they talk about these things coming out of the sun. Now, if they were actually ships, maybe that's the sun, of course, would be behind them. We weren't literally going into the sun. But again, in 1561, we thought, human beings thought, because we didn't know any better, at least the Europeans didn't know any better, I should say, that we thought the Earth was the center of the universe. And actually, to speak anything else was heresy. So they thought that these things were coming out of the sun. They didn't realize that the sun was a ball of fiery gas, even if they did. Who knows? There's actually a lot of great footage, and I'll try to put some up during this, of UFOs near the sun. Some actually look like they're draining energy of the sun before they skedaddle. Weird. Really weird. But again, these guys had no frame of reference. So when they're describing black and red spheres in the sky, seemingly to fight each other, and in the one before were crosses and cylinders and crescent-shaped objects, all of which have been described, in a triangle, and the spear, mind you, all of which have been described by modern-day witnesses of UFOs. There's a ton of them out there. The triangle ones, if you look that up right now, you're going to find scads of video with triangle-shaped UFOs, cylindrical-shaped UFOs. They've even spotted cylindrical-shaped UFOs in the rings of Saturn. One guy calls them the ring makers. He believes that these UFOs are actually making the rings of Saturn. Weird, wild times we live in. Also, and recently there have been nothing but fires in the fiery objects coming out of the sky, some blue and some green, and then these loud flashes. And when I said loud flashes, I know that's ridiculous. It's almost like the Ghostbusters when he says, "Listen, do you smell that?" But these huge flashes followed by a loud thundering noise, almost as if something breaking the sound barrier, but over a much larger area. Impact craters, the whole 9 yards. There's a lot of stuff going on in the skies above our world right now. Even launching so many spy satellites lately, it's not even funny. So what's going on? What's going on in France, do you think? I personally think these were UFOs. I think it's very clear that these are UFOs, and I would be hard-pressed for somebody else to come up with a different explanation for this. Now, to give you an idea about this kind of reporting, right, about the newspaper reporting back in the day, around the turn of the century, there were a lot of airships spotted all over America, right? Now, a lot of people have said those were hoaxes. Those were put in the newspaper to garner attention, right? Fantastic stories to get you to read the paper, which may or may not be true. I don't necessarily buy that across the board. It might be true in a couple of cases around the turn of the 20th century, early 1900s, but I'm kind of on the fence on it. This, however, these broadsheets were really for people to get their news about the weather, about big things happening in their town, to see them in print. It was the first kind of newspapers they had out there, right? So I'm absolutely convinced these are UFOs. With the evidence that we're given, and I know it's all eyewitness testimony, but we're talking about 2 towns worth of testimony. It would be like, I don't know if you're all familiar with the Phoenix Lights that we'll be doing an episode on fairly soon, but these 5 and 7 lights appeared over Phoenix, Arizona on more than one occasion. They were dismissed out of hand as flares, but they were filmed from many different angles by many different people in Phoenix, Arizona, even to the point where witnesses said something huge blacked out the sky. And when you see this array of lights over the basin of Phoenix, Arizona, that don't slowly flow down like flares do, like military flares do, but stay stationary and come on one at a time and then go off. Absolutely amazing. This reminds me of that kind of story where an entire town witnesses an event and is talking about it in the papers. So, that's it for this edition of Off the Beaten Path. I really hope you dug this story. I found it fascinating, or I would have presented it to you. Again, Scream t-shirts, Scream merch for all our screamers out there. And for all you screamers out there, I would like to thank again our listeners at SCRMradio.com. That's Scream. Radio.com. Again, I'm always plugging my Patreon page, but we're barely making it here at Casa de Hagen. Any help that you can give us to continue doing this and to make this show better. We're slowly trying to put more sound effects in, try to improve our sets. We'd like to eventually go out to some of these locations, film where these things have happened, and report it to you that way. But I can't do any of that without your help. So please check out my Patreon page if you'd like to become a patron. Soon we're going to have Off the Beaten Path t-shirts as well that you can wear. How cool would that be? I think it would be very cool. But again, I can't do any of that without your help. So thanks again for tuning in. And as always, my brothers and sisters, you keep those heads up. Have a great day.